All right, let's see if we're live. How's it going, folks? Chuck Holton here, and welcome to the CBN live update here from Jerusalem again. And I really appreciate you all being here. I'm watching where everybody's from. If you haven't posted where you're from, go ahead and put a comment down there, because that is really cool. Man, we got people from all over the world. It's incredible. It's been a very good day for me personally, because I surprised my wife with an early Christmas present yesterday, and that was I brought my son and my daughter-in-law, who live in Armenia, over from Armenia, and surprised her to be here for a few days, so that she wouldn't be, because they're not going to be able to be with us on Christmas this year. So we surprised her, and she's been having a great time taking them around the old city and having some fun. Today we went down to En-Gedi, the springs where King David hid out when he was being pursued by his enemies, and so that was really fun. And it's cool having them here, especially to take my daughter-in-law, who's Armenian, over to the Armenian quarter of Old Jerusalem and let her wander around and talk to people. And they're so shocked, to hear somebody from Armenia. So anyway, it was a good time, and that's fun. It kind of give you a sense for how safe it is here in Jerusalem, that I would bring my son and daughter-in-law here. And she's pregnant with our third grandchild, and is due in a few months. And so this is probably the last chance she'll get to travel before she has her baby. So very, very fun, sweet time together, making some memories with them. Their first time to Israel, and they're loving it. They're having a great time. So you'll probably see them in some videos in the next couple of days as I'm uploading things over on my website, chuckholton.com, and on my YouTube channel, The Hot Zone. You can go to The Hot Zone with Chuck Holton right here on YouTube and watch more reporting from over here and some sort of other stuff that I'm talking about, and follow all my reporting from around the globe on chuckholton.com. So let's talk for a minute about what's going on in here in Israel. Strangely enough, I actually was hearing explosions from the balcony of our Airbnb here in Jerusalem just moments ago. And I always have to caveat that by saying they were very far away. These were not nearby explosions. You can hear explosions if they're, from missiles or things like that, easily, especially at night, easily 20 miles away. And so when you hear journalists saying, we're hearing very loud explosions, they're not really telling you anything, because they've probably never heard a quiet explosion. What they're probably trying to convey is that they sound like they're close, but an explosion that is 5 miles away, depending on what it is that's exploding, could sound like it's very, very close. You could feel an explosion that's that close. An explosion that's one or 2 miles away could really rattle your windows. And most journalists just don't have any experience with being near explosions. I mean, like near enough to be the guy setting them off, like I did when I went to demolition school. And so they don't really know how to judge how far away an explosion is, and they don't know by listening to tell if it's maybe due to an outgoing fire rather than incoming fire, which could make a huge difference in what they report. I tell that story a lot about when we were in Ukraine last year. The CNN guys were saying that they were hearing very loud explosions, and that meant that the Russians were pushing into Kyiv and would soon take the city. And I was listening and going, guys, that's outgoing fire. That means the Ukrainians are fighting back. That means the Russians probably are not going to be coming into the city. And it means that the CNN guys were giving exactly the wrong story, the 180 degrees wrong, because they didn't know what they were talking about. And that's common. I mean, the military is a very arcane culture, and most people don't live their lives in war zones. And so learning to read the sounds and sights and smells of the war zone is a fine art that has to be developed with experience. So I appreciate all you being on here. Today we have heard a lot of rocket fire coming out of Gaza. I say heard, I've heard my little app going off, my Shofar app. I'll show you this one here from just a few moments ago. This is Tel Aviv, and you can see now all of those, just so you understand, all of those little red dots are not missiles impacting in Tel Aviv. So it looks like here, if those were all impacts, Tel Aviv would be getting flattened right about now. But that's not what this is showing you. It's showing you areas of Tel Aviv that are under rocket alert. So think of it like a tornado warning. There's not necessarily a tornado on the ground destroying everything, but it's highly possible that that could happen in that area. So when I see these dots here, I know that there's a rocket that's heading in this general direction that could strike because it's multiple rockets. This can tell you something about how many rockets are being fired, because they are good enough, they being the Israelis, at tracking where the rockets go, or where they're going to go, where they're headed after they take off, that they usually would only put an alert on one or two of these neighborhoods if it was just one rocket. So if it's a whole bunch of dots like that, that doesn't mean that it's that they're not sure where it's going to land. It means that there's a whole bunch of rockets coming in that are aiming for Tel Aviv. And this just shows you that the Palestinians in Gaza they still have some fight in them, and they're still firing rockets on a daily basis. This is not the only rocket barrage that we suffered today, but this is one of the most recent ones. Now, if I look through the ones that came in, the most recent couple of them came actually from the north. You see, I don't know if you can read that there, confrontation line, won't focus on me. The top two are, say, confrontation line, Upper Galilee. So that's up in the north. And that means that Hezbollah is firing rockets as well. And that leads to what we were talking about yesterday. Daniel Hagari and Yoav Gallant were giving press briefings, and were talking specifically about Hezbollah and the fact that they are just making themselves a real nuisance in southern Lebanon and firing anti-tank guided missiles, mortars, rockets, sniper fire, all sorts of things into Israel, to the point where there's 80,000 people who cannot go home because of that. And since there's 80,000 people that cannot go home, the top brass of the IDF have said that they are going to take every measure to push Hezbollah back behind the river. It starts with an L, and I keep spacing on the name of the river. It's a river that's it bisects from east to west, southern Lebanon, about, let's say, 10 miles, maybe a little more, in some places a little less in others, from the Israeli border. And as a part of the last ceasefire that they inked with Hezbollah after the last Israel-Lebanon war, they agreed, Hezbollah agreed in writing, signed it, that they would not have troops south of that river. But they have been breaking that since day one. You can't trust anything they say. They've made that very clear, and they're definitely breaking that agreement, and have almost since day one. So Israel is saying, you're going to go back behind that line, or we're going to make you go back behind that line. Take your pick. And so we may very soon see an escalation in the north as the IDF pushes into Lebanon to kill off or push back all of the Hezbollah that are within 10 miles of the Israeli border. So that, why 10 miles? Because small arms and artillery are limited to a range So artillery is limited to a range of about 10 miles. Those rockets, now Hezbollah has longer range rockets that can reach anywhere in Israel. And to me, it's still kind of mind-boggling that Israel would learn to live with the threat of your neighbor wanting to wipe you out and having all these rockets, and that they're going to just continue to lob rockets now and then into Israeli cities. And what Israel came up with is this defensive strategy of the Iron Dome system, where many countries, probably ours included, would have come up with an offensive strategy like, we're going to turn your country into a parking lot if you keep firing missiles at us. And that's the strategy that the IDF is now taking in Gaza, for sure. But for decades, they have been essentially training Hamas and Hezbollah that they could get away with a certain amount of aggression against Israel, and Israel would not respond with much force. But Israel is kind of done with that and starting to realize that we really don't like living in a neighborhood where our neighbors keep trying to set our house on fire. And so we can't move to a different neighborhood, so we're going to just rid ourselves of the threat. And part of the reason probably that Israel has taken the defensive tack that they have, where they just developed a system to shoot down all the rockets, most of them, is because of the concern that if we go too hard against any of our neighbors, all of the other neighbors will come to their defense and get involved, and then we'll actually have a gigantic regional war on our hands, which we may or may not be able to win. They can win against Hezbollah. They can win against Hamas. They can probably win against Hamas and Hezbollah, but they would have a much harder time winning against Lebanon and Hezbollah and Syria and Iraqi provisional military units and Jordanian military and Iranian military and Yemeni military, and like all of these guys get involved, and Israel's got a real problem on their hands. Jordan is probably not much of an issue in that scenario, but the rest of them, and people have been asking me all along, why did Hamas commit these atrocities on October 7th? Did they not think that Israel would do what they're now doing? I mean, what did they expect Israel to do? What was their thought? Did they really think that they could get away with coming in and killing 1,200 people and carting them off to Gaza as hostages, and Israel wouldn't do anything? People have been asking that question over and over and over again, and I think the best answer you can come up with has a couple of points to it. Number one, I think Hamas was quite a bit more successful than they thought they would be in that attack of October 7th. They caught Israel so unawares that they just ran with it. They're just like, whoa, we thought we'd get a lot more pushback from Israel as soon as we breached the border, and here we are hours into this thing and nobody's basically coming, so we're gonna just keep shooting people and taking people hostage. Number two, it wasn't just Hamas. Hamas was the one that kicked it off and initiated it and started it and planned this attack with likely lots of help from Iran. But a lot of other organizations, groups, and just plain old civilians in Gaza joined in the party when they broke down the walls into Israel on October 7th. When they started seeing Humvees, military Humvees, come driving back into Gaza with, stacked up with Hamas fighters proclaiming victory over Israel, they kind of got a little heady, and they kind of, mob mentality took over, and everybody was like, wow, I want a Humvee. And so they just all these people just flooded into Israel that weren't actually part of the planning for this attack. And so there were something like more than 3,000 people who came across the border, and they were looting and rioting and setting fire to things and just running amok in there. And maybe some of them actually thought they were going to, take over Israel or something. I think, mob mentality being what it is, That is, when people are affected by mob mentality, they will do things they would have never considered doing in their normal mindset. I've seen that over and over again. I had a guy come after me with a hammer at an Antifa rally on Inauguration Day, 2016, or it was 2017, I guess. I mean, it was. I don't think that guy would have just normally grabbed a hammer and come after people, but he was so swept up in the moment, so swept up in all the destruction that was going on around him. I really think there's a demonic influence to that when you have a large crowd of people that is committing crimes left and right, starts breaking and burning things, that demons get involved and start affecting everybody in the crowd, and they start just losing their minds, and the demons just have a field day with that. And I think that is exactly part of what happened on October 7th, okay? So they weren't thinking about the repercussions. They were affected by the mob mentality, and they were just, they were completely under the control of those demons, and they were losing, they were going after everything. Number two, I think that Hamas, for its part, of course, they planned it and executed the initial stage of that assault, and they were probably expecting and hoping that Israel would strike hard against Gaza and kill a bunch of civilians. Is what they were really hoping. Because what they believed would happen, or they were hoping would happen, is that all their neighbors in the region would jump to their defense, and it would cause a regional war, and then everybody would come down on Israel and crush Israel, and they would finally be the catalyst that started the Great War that would take back their land and push the Jews into the sea, and they were basically affected by delusions of grandeur. Israel, for its part, a lot of I've heard these rather, in a way, these conspiracy theories that talk about that there were Israeli leadership, there was Israeli leadership that wanted this to happen, even maybe facilitated it, even maybe sent IDF to kill a bunch of people at the music festival and that sort of thing. First of all, if you believe that, shame on you. That is profane. That is an absolutely abhorrent belief. And it's as far from the truth as anything that I've ever seen, having been here on the ground, having been to Re'im and having been to Be'eri and having been to Sderot and talked to the people as recently as yesterday, right here at this hotel, talking to a man who was shot in the assault on Sderot. It certainly was no conspiracy theory on the part of the Israelis. So you might say, well, then how in the world could their intel have been so bad? Well, it came down to a couple of things. And unfortunately, Israel has a history of engaging in these kinds of mistakes when it comes to their relations with their neighbors. In 1967 and again in 1973, there were clear warning signs that Israel was about to be attacked, and they didn't believe it. They just didn't believe it for several reasons. Number one, they were like, there's no way the Arabs could pull that off. We know the Arabs. They're too stupid. They're too primitive. Have you been to the parts that they control? Looks like a third world country over there. Look at us. We're a first world country. There's no way they could get away with that. So there was a kind of a jingoistic hubris about what they were saying or what they were thinking. And then there was and we have such a great military, if they try anything, we'll crush them like a bug, it'll be easy, no big deal. So the hubris extended both directions in underestimating their enemies and overestimating their own capabilities. And so that is what we saw, I believe with absolute certainty, on October 7th. They had the plans for this attack that their own intel agencies had been able to glean from their sources in Gaza. They had the whole plan for this attack. They even had a name for it. They called it Operation Jericho Wall. And they really just saw it as aspirational. This is something that Hamas would love to do someday, but those poor little brown guys down there, there's no way they could pull that off because we're too good and they're too bad. So we don't have to worry about it. And that was exactly what they were saying. I mean, the news is coming out now that that's what the top brass in the IDF was saying, is that they just didn't believe it. And so even though the lower echelon people saw it, understood it, and were sounding the alarm bells, I mean, think about it. I just did a story about this for CBN. It'll be airing here in a day or two, probably next week. And I interviewed several experts about this. And Ryan Macbeth, who's an analyst, open source analyst friend of mine, very good. He's very good. You should really follow Ryan Macbeth. His Substack is second to none. It's really good. And he, I talked to him about it in the interview. He said, think about it. Do you want to be the IDF colonel or general who says, yeah, don't look out, guys, Hamas is going to bring hang gliders over here or parasails and kill us all and kill thousands of people? I mean, do you want to be the guy who puts your career on the line saying that? Because that could never happen. That could never happen. But it did happen. And that's one of the ways that the underdog very often takes out the more powerful party, is by doing it in a way that is so unthinkable that they don't even prepare for it. And they wouldn't believe it when it's staring them right in the face. So without a doubt, there will be a reckoning for the intelligence failures that happened on October 7th. Why hasn't there been already? Because they're still at war. And Israelis know one thing, that when we're at war, it's us against the world. And we have to pull together. And so they don't engage in finger pointing until the war is won. Once we are safely back to a status quo where we know that our country is not about to be destroyed, then we can start pointing the fingers and putting together committees and throwing political jabs at each other and that sort of thing. And I guarantee you that will happen. They will come to that point at some point. They'll get there. But right now, that's not on the docket. That's not going to happen until they are finished with what they're doing, both in the north and in the south. So if you didn't get to see my interview with Don Kadar, the Special Forces Master Sergeant from the IDF, he's a reservist, but he has been in and out of Gaza on missions since day one, and he tells it like it is. I interviewed him yesterday live on my YouTube channel, The Hot Zone with Chuck Holton. You can go watch it over there. Just look for the live tab. If you go subscribe to The Hot Zone and then look for the live tab, hit that, you should see Don Kadar, a picture of him with his helmet on there. It's a fairly short interview, but he tells it like it is. And if you want to know if the IDF is winning, listen to what he has to say. This is a guy who is literally, he was under mortar fire while we were doing the interview and was telling us exactly what was going on. And he is the one who sent me the video that I put up on my website that showed the prisoners lined up 5 by 5 down the street in Gaza that they had captured yesterday, which were probably a little over 100 in that one group of Palestinian fighters. Now, in that group of Hamas terrorists that they captured, there were people who were teachers at the UNRWA schools. There were people who claimed to be journalists, and they probably are journalists, but they also have a side gig supporting Hamas. And so just the fact, if you hear in the mainstream media, the fact that there were teachers and, plumbers and florists and, that sort of thing in that group of people, that doesn't necessarily mean they weren't Hamas terrorists. It just means that there's a lot of overlap in Gaza. And if you're a military age male in Gaza, you probably don't have a lot of choice in the matter. If Hamas says you're going to come and take this rocket launcher and go blow up an Israeli, you have to do it. There was a really scary close call in Gaza yesterday. So a video came out that was put out by Hamas. If you want me to put it up on my chuckholton.com page, tell me in the chat here and I'll go put it up afterwards. Otherwise, you can go probably find it if you go looking for it, Telegram or YouTube or someplace. But I can put the video up if you want me to do it. But there's a video that Hamas put out that shows a camera coming up out of the ground, like out of a tunnel. And I imagine it was just the camera. It probably wasn't a guy, because it comes up and it's like from me to you, from me to this camera, from a bunch of IDF soldiers inside their camp. They're under a tent, they're sitting around, they're smoking, they're talking, they're drinking coffee, and this camera comes up and just starts going woo, and just kind of panning around, and it is inside their camp. So a lot of their tunnel entrances, they never finished, apparently. What they did was they would dig a shaft right up to the surface and then stop just a foot or two short of the surface, so that they can, if they need to, they can go back to that shaft. They just have to dig out a little bit and they can break through the soil, but from the top, you don't know it's there. And so apparently that's what they did. And the camera came out of the ground right inside the IDF camp. It was, I mean, it's startling footage to see, to say the least. And this thing just pans around. You see all their equipment and vehicles and tents and guys just laying around in hammocks and stuff. And the camera's like right there. Like it's amazing they didn't see it. But Hamas was stupid enough to put that video out. They were probably so excited that they got the video that they're like, this is great, we want to put it out. So they put it out on the internet. And the IDF intelligence unit, who subscribes to those Telegram channels, pulled that video off and went, holy cow, and called, figured out where they were, called those troops and said, very carefully and slowly, make your way out of your campground and leave everything behind right now. And they're like, okay. And so they got up and just sort of sidled out of the campsite, and went out. And then they set up a perimeter around their campsite and watched their own campsite. And late that night, they saw someone come out of a hole and go into one of their tents. And they opened fire on that because they knew that anybody that's in that campsite now is a bad guy. And so they started shooting at the tent. The guy was a suicide bomber, and he had a suicide vest on, and he blew himself up as he was getting shot. And that set off a sympathetic detonation, we think, of a very large amount of explosives underneath the camp that basically blew the entire camp to kingdom come. The tents, everything that was there, all the guys' backpacks and other gear just vaporized into the sky. Nobody was killed, but it was a very close call. And it, I'm sure, is making the IDF go, maybe we ought to drill a few holes in the ground around our campsites from now on, because that would have been like the inaugural launch of the IDF space program right there. It was a huge explosion. Very, very bad. And so it just goes to show just how many tunnels there are. They even are not even sure that there was a tunnel there to begin with. They're thinking that maybe the Hamas terrorists were able to actually tunnel under the camp and up after they established that camp. It was in kind of a rear area in Gaza. And so they were able to go from an existing tunnel and then tunnel right under the camp without anybody knowing and come up and set a bunch of explosives under there. But holy cow, either way, that is nuts. And that's the kind of warfare that, who's ever had to deal with that before? Good grief. So these Hamas terrorists, they can dig. If nothing else, they can dig. There's also video that came out yesterday of some Hamas terrorists low crawling inside a apartment, residential building, and then it was filmed by the Hamas terrorists. They had helmet cams or whatever, and they were crawling just on their faces underneath a window, and then their idea was to pop up and fire anti-tank rockets at the IDF. The reason that we see this video is because those guys were neutralized by the IDF, and they got the camera and put the video up themselves. The IDF did. So it is further proof, as if we needed any, that Hamas uses residential buildings as military targets. That's why I'm saying, I think the IDF had this idea that they would go into Gaza, they would, clear the whole of Gaza, find any military stuff, blow that stuff up, and then leave with the rest of Gaza intact. And what they have been finding is that essentially everything in Gaza is military related in some way, shape, or form, or is subject to being taken over by the military to be used as a fighting position. And that presents a very, very difficult challenge for the IDF. Like, what are they going to do? Because they literally cannot just turn Gaza into a parking lot. They don't have enough explosives to do that. But what are they going to do? It's a very good question. That's why I think they're focusing right now on, they are just trying to kill the leadership of Hamas as quickly as possible. If they can say, we've taken out 9 of the 10 top Hamas officials, that would be a possible way for them to declare victory. Okay, we've taken out Hamas because we took out all their leaders, and we've cleared out anybody who was fighting. We've blown up all the tunnels we could find. We've set them back a long way. Now we just have to figure out how we're going to govern, or they're going to govern, or somebody's going to govern, because, the United States is saying the Palestinians have to govern themselves. I get it. We stand for self-governance. That's all right. But the Israelis are saying, we let these guys govern themselves, and they keep trying to kill us. So it's probably going to have to be something along the lines of something joint, maybe at best, where we work together. There's always hope, and we should pray toward that end, pray for peace. We are starting to see Azerbaijan and Armenia making noises for a peace deal, so it can happen. Azerbaijan and Armenia are every bit as have every bit as much animus toward one another as Hamas and Israel do, I would say. You couldn't have more anyway, but they have at least as much, and they are at least saying the right things now, even though Armenia really doesn't have much of a choice because they're totally outgunned by Azerbaijan and who is supported by Turkey. And they are saying, we want to start with some confidence building measures with one another. So now Azerbaijan and Armenia are having a prisoner swap, prisoners of war from their recent conflicts. 32 Armenian prisoners are going home to Armenia, praise God, and 2 Azeri prisoners are going back to Azerbaijan. That's not because, it's just because Armenia doesn't have as many Azeri prisoners as Azerbaijan has of Armenian prisoners. More Armenians have died in skirmishes along the border with Armenia, between them and Azerbaijan, than have died in the Nagorno-Karabakh district, which is where the whole conflict was sort of focused for years, over the last 3 years. I'm talking after the war in Armenia, between Armenia and Azerbaijan ended in 2020, with 5,000 Armenians losing their lives in 44 days. That's a very bad, very, very bad war. But after that, more Armenian soldiers have died, just not in the Nagorno-Karabakh district, which is about a 4-hour drive into Azerbaijan. They've died on the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan proper, because Azerbaijan wants to take the southern part of Armenia and make it their own. And with these noises that they're making, like, oh, we would be open to a peace deal, Armenia is saying the same thing. Yes, we would be open to a peace deal, but they're also sort of very wary, because whenever Azerbaijan has said that in the past, they've reached out the hand of friendship with this hand, and the other hand has got a knife to stab you in the back. And they don't trust the Azeris further than they can throw them. And so we'll have to watch that and see what's happening. But anyway, without a doubt, at least they're making the right noises. And so there is hope that someday Israel and the Palestinians can start to make noises like that too. Not Hamas. Hamas is never going to make noises like that. Okay, so I'm going to take some questions here. And I see one flying by, if I can find what I did with my glasses. Let's see. I can almost read it, but I have to think too hard without my glasses to read it. So